changing your story is a really powerful technique, let's say. But I don't want to focus on it too much as a technique, because if you start to think of it as a technique, you'll start to want to force it. The minute you start to use force with this kind of approach to life, you start to cause trouble for yourself. So let's start with the warnings, and then we'll move on to the real promise, because this is really important. When we use force energetically with our minds, a lot of that is done with our minds, just trying to force life into certain channels, which we are all extremely familiar with because we live in an extremely forceful society. We force ourselves to think certain ways, to behave certain ways, to react to other people in certain ways that are quite unnatural. And when we use force, we create a counter force energetically. So we force our way through life. We experience force coming back at us, and it becomes increasingly uncomfortable. So if you try to force stories on your life, you do it with your mind and not with your heart, you will probably be rather successful to begin with, because it can be quite powerful stuff. But the long-term consequences, what you find is that you build up long-term resistance. And then you have to deal with that resistance, which can be extremely painful and really hard work. So I want to encourage you, above all, when we're doing any of this kind of rather powerful, rather subtle work, if you can call it work, play. It's really play, because it's only when you do it playfully that you get the great results. So when we're doing this powerful play with our lives, to come from the heart, okay? If you're feeling very heady, if you're feeling kind of fraught and stressed, don't do it. Wait, relax. There's a reason why I teach people to relax every single day. There's a reason why I do the activations very slowly, very relaxed, very in the moment, and sharing that with you, because that's where the power lies. The power lies not in our mental ability to control, but in our heart's ability to open, to flower, to grow in a beautiful, natural way, and to connect in with our deepest soul desire, if you like, that it springs up through the heart. And if you can stay aligned with your heart, there is extraordinary power in such a simple thing as changing a story, as changing a story about your life. And you'll be able to do this with so many stories. So anyone who's worked with me privately will recognize that we've done a lot of that over time. I listen to your story, and some parts of it don't resonate to me as being true. And so we look at what's a more true story, and I'll explain what I mean by true in a moment. And as the story becomes more true, I see this smile lighting up on your face, which is basically my mark of whether this is true or not. And that's my guide. If the smile, it's the purity and the broadness and the spontaneity of the smile is the external measure of the truthfulness of the story. At the same time, I'm sensing the resonance of the story, every detail of it, just sensing. I feel sometimes like it's like a light shining from my heart, kind of shining onto all the details of the stories to see where the optimum beauty is. Let's put it like that. So it's like I'm looking at all the colors of the story. I'm looking at the painting of the story that you're telling me to see whether that's a really beautiful painting or not. That's a painting that feels beautiful to you, which is in the smile, feels beautiful to me, which is in the resonance, and creates a beautiful life, which is in the color and the expression and the form of the story that you're telling. And everyone is constantly telling a story. That's what I listen to all day long. I listen to people's stories. But some of those stories I don't like listening to. They're boring, they're repetitive, they're uncreative, they're destructive, they're unenjoyable, intensely unenjoyable to the person who's telling them. And the energy is beautifully unenjoyable at the same time when you listen to those stories. And so it's in everybody's interest. It's as much in my interest, if I'm listening to one of those stories, to hear a better story as it is in your interest. So this is like, it's an act of generosity for you to change your story, because it works for all of us. It helps all of us when you have a better story. Okay? So this is about tuning into the heart. It is about refining your ability to sense energetically what's going on. And this is something that will simply grow the more energy work you do. We all have that sense. Some of you have it already very powerful. Some of you don't use it very well. It's like, you sense things, you feel things, you're very sensitive people. A lot of people I work with, if not all of them, are highly sensitive people at their core. Sometimes they've switched that off through being hurt. Sometimes they've switched that off by trying to achieve a lot. When you try to achieve a lot, you normally launch yourself into the world on a massive burst of force, basically, because most ways of doing business are taught through force, like mass disturbance of the marketplace so that you can be the noisiest or the loudest voice. And that may create some short-term wins, but the long-term consequences often carry self-destruction with them. And that's something you could look at in terms of the stories you've already experienced in your life, if that's relevant to you. So we work with our heart, which is softer, but it's more powerful. I worked with somebody once who taught me about different types of power. So physical power, which is what we have traditionally used in farming, and all the old-fashioned kind of work was based on physical power, is the least powerful form of power that we have available to us as human beings. And that's why it was gradually expanded and in many ways superseded by mental power. When we started to realize we could use our minds to kind of leverage our physical power. We built machines, for example, to do what human beings and horses and mules used to do physically. We've built systems to do things that were previously done manually. And ultimately, we've built an enormous tangible and intangible technology that does the vast majority of what was previously done physically. So even a vacuum cleaner, first of all, became something that lightened the physical load, or a washing machine. If you go to a country where people still wash their clothes in the river, you realize just how much time used to be spent just washing clothes. And then the washing machine took over most of the work of that. We still complain now about the time it takes. I hear mums complain about the amount of time they spend doing the laundry, and you think, oh my goodness, that's ridiculous. Can you imagine if you had 10 children and you had to wash your clothes in the river? That's the reality for women all over the world. So this is the mark of progress. We went to mental power. The next level of power is emotional power, which is essentially heart power. It's the power of the heart. And it is way more powerful than mental power. It has not been used predominantly in our society. We are just developing this kind of power really at the moment. It is the power of love. It's also the power of feeling. So that's why we have this wave now of talking more about manifestation. So a lot of manifestation is done from the mind. and it has those limitations built into it. The next level of manifestation, which is really what we're talking about here, one aspect of it, is from the heart. It aligns you from your core with the manifestation that we're talking about. And as you explore this, you will find that there is extraordinary power within it. By bringing the heart in, it enables you to change yourself. So you're not so much just trying to change the outer circumstances, which is the way you do it with mental power. It's like you rewrite the outer story. When you work with your heart, you rewrite the inner story. So you work with your feelings. The most powerful manifestation, no, I won't say the most powerful, but a way more powerful form of manifestation comes when you work with your feelings. You place your feelings in the heart of it, than when you work only with your mental constructs. So your feelings enable you to create from the present moment. And all of that is done through the feeling of now. This is a very powerful form of creativity. And it has been, it is being talked about more now. I'm seeing people teach it a bit more. It was quite largely ignored through a lot of the Think and Grow Rich, everything that grew out of the Think and Grow Rich movement. The use your mind to control your destiny. So there is a higher level of power, which is spiritual power. We do use that occasionally. We're not talking about that today. That's really where you go for direct intervention, direct divine intervention. That's super powerful, super easy for us. We don't really need to do very much at all. And I talk about that sometimes at other times. But today, we're talking about this heart power, which is the power of your feeling. It's the power of your ability to sense into the resonance of the options available to you, both in the way you interpret your past and in the way you shape and form your future. And so that's what we're refining. That's the skill we're developing through this activity of changing your story. We're really developing the skill of feeling, the skill of sensing, because you can then sense into, does it feel better if I say that my terrible childhood, for example, was my chance to heal an ancestral pattern? Or does it feel better if it's my opportunity to learn a lesson about being a human being? Or does it feel better if it's my opportunity to heal or contribute to healing a dysfunctional or destructive pattern within the body of humanity? Does it feel better if it's, I don't know, those are some of my the common themes that I use with clients, because I find I get good resonance with those stories. You can come up with your own, finish that sentence. There are unlimited stories you can tell about that terrible part of your childhood, or that awful event that happened to you that you still remember when you were 5 years old and your mum didn't listen to you when you really needed her to, or your dad turned his back on you or disappeared, or whatever it is. Mums and dads, they all did things. They all had their own stories running, and they really were quite incapable of being the perfect mum and dad that you needed just in that moment, unless you can see the perfection in it. In which case you might thank them for all the terrible things they did and just forgive all of that and recognize that it's entirely up to you what you make of that. And that can be a really ugly story. It can be a really beautiful story. It can be a challenging story. It can be an extraordinary story. It can be a story of hope and redemption, or misery and poverty and suffering. It's entirely up to you. There is nothing about the event itself which determines the feeling of the story. There are terrible events that are challenging to make good stories of. That's what makes a great human being. Your ability to see the beauty, to see the perfection, to change the story. That is, in a way, the nature of redemption. That is the nature of this deep shift we can make inside ourselves that turns us from being weak, powerless, hopeless little creatures into true human beings that living on this planet, being connected with something that is bigger and more powerful than we can understand, being part of this great system. The words are too weak to describe something that, when you have the eyes to see the beauty, can only leave you in awe and wonder at where we're living. With all the darkness that happens on this planet and all the lightness that happens on this planet, if we have the eyes to see it, we can find perfection, we can find beauty, we can find joy, we can find peace, we can find all of those inner states, inner feelings that make us resonate, that make us feel alive, that make us feel awake, that make us feel that we are actually living. Because when we feel that we're not fully living, or we're missing what we're really here for, which is living. We didn't come here to be dying, we came here to be living, to experience living. When we feel that, our resonance, it's like, woo, the resonance is really tingly and beautiful, and it's like, oh yeah, that's the one I want. And so that's what we're kind of practicing, is which is the one do you want? Do you want the red sweetie, or the pink sweetie, or the blue sweetie, or the yellow one, or the green one, or the one that's different from everybody else? Because you can tell that story if you like. You don't have to tell your old story, and you can change it at will. And if you change it in a powerful and effective way, other people around you will be inspired by your story. Even when you change it very quickly, if you do it with heart, you do it with love, it's very powerful for other people. If you come in with your new mental constructs, like, no, I reject all the things that, I said about the past, this is how it is now. You know how it is. You go and upset all your family, and nobody understands you anymore. And it's like, it was a really horrible feeling. And probably most of us have done that at some time in our lives. Tried to go and dominate everybody else with my story. But when you do it with your heart, you do it with love, you do it with softness and power, a greater power than mental power. It tends to engage and enroll others because you're emanating love, not control and domination. And so it changes the way people behave around you. They will start to cooperate with your story. It will suddenly seem like everyone's being pulled into this new story you're telling. That's really a beautiful experience. So yes, you have the choice. It's up to you. You don't have to. You can tell the same story every single day of your life. You can tell it for the rest of your life. And if you like that story, great. If you don't like that story, not so great. And it's just up to you. Do you have the courage? Because it takes a bit of courage the courage is not actually to change the story. That's easy. The courage is to kind of sit down and give yourself the time to be so powerful that you can be a different person, and you can do it now. That's what takes courage. It doesn't take courage to actually change it. Once you're in that state, that more relaxed state, it's the most natural and obvious thing to do. Your whole being is like drawn towards the light. It's drawn towards beauty. It's drawn towards joy. It's drawn towards peace. It's not drawn towards devastation and destruction and misery and sadness and all that anger and frustration and blah, blah, blah. We're not attracted to that. But when we're locked in it, we can get addicted to it. or we can feel stuck in it. We can feel trapped in it. And we can fight. The old stories will fight to the death, literally. They will fight until they die. The new stories come in, it's new energy, it's very flexible, it's very kind of nice, happy stuff. The old story is the story you've been telling for a long time. It's heavier, it's more static, it will fight. It's like it's hard work sometimes for it to be removed. You know, it can feel a bit sticky, and it will feel like, you know, there's resistance as the new energy comes in, it hits the old energy. There's resistance there from the old energy because it's quite established at an energetic level. And that resistance is the struggle that you feel. And it is it's a struggle to the death, because at a certain point that old energy will die. It will leave you. It will die to your life. It may well be food for somebody else and make something else really alive. It doesn't really die. But your experience is that it's a struggle unto death. And the new energy will win. This is the epic battle of every great movie, every great book, every great hero's story. It's not the struggle of killing people out there. It's the struggle of the new light coming in and the old darkness being released from within your system. So that's the game that we're playing. That's the drama still of the story. But if you bring your heart to every part of that, you will soften the struggle enormously. And if you get very skillful at changing the story, you really don't need to suffer from this. You only suffer when you're caught in that old story and you haven't realized yet. It's like you're just stuck in your old defaults and you haven't realized that you can change it. So this is tremendously powerful stuff. It's only to be played with. It's not to be taken seriously. It's only to be done in a playful, heartfelt sense. And it's something, it's the adult creativity. It's the adult Lego. It's the adult building bricks. It's the adult little sticks and stones and insects and, you know, the things that children do. That's what we do as adults. We play with our stories and we change our lives.